The topic that's on everyone's mind in mining this year seems to be ESG, environment, social and governance issues, and its impact on the mining industry. If you look at last year, it was estimated that around $40 trillion worth of financial assets are being run with some kind of ESG mandate, which does beg the question, where and how does mining fit into all of this? Yesterday, Eskom CEO Andre de Ruyter said that the message of the climate envoys who visited South Africa in the run-up to COP26 in Scotland was that there is substantial concessional financing available to enable South Africa to pursue a just energy transition. And he also indicated, however, that the initial focus would likely be on supporting Eskom to build the infrastructure required for decarbonisation, as well as to support vulnerable workers and communities, rather than to address Eskom's legacy debt. Well, to talk about how or maybe whether mining companies are embedding ESG into their corporate DNA and their strategy, I'm joined now by Tracy Davies, Executive Director of Just Share. Just Share works with local and international activists and responsible investors to advance sustainable finance and a just transition to a low-carbon economy in the country. Jane Mamet, who's a partner and Director for Sustainability and Climate Change at PwC, and Mzila Mthenjane, who's Exxaro's Executive Head for Stakeholder Affairs. Jane, just to set the scene here, if the sector, the mining sector, doesn't respond to ESG, do you see the sector becoming irrelevant and perhaps losing access to this large and growing source of ESG mandated capital, or will private markets just step in?
I think, look, the mining sector does need to respond to the ESG agenda. The mining sector is vast and it's big, and obviously the fossil fuels is under pressure at the moment, but there's a lot of mining minerals and stuff that's actually going to be part of the energy transition and the new economy as we go forward. So they definitely have a place in our economy, but do need to respond to the ESG agenda and make sure that their impact is positive where it needs to be, and where there is obviously negative impact from mining, that it is minimised and managed and put right as you go forward. But overall, mining done responsibly can have a huge societal, economic and governance impact on our society and our economy.
I want to stay with you for a second longer though, Jane, on the point of where we see coal, for example, at the moment. I mean, the coal price has shot through the roof. We've seen the likes of Exxaro on the panel. Its share price was up over 10% yesterday. Thungela up over 100 Rand. And the market seems to flow where the returns are flowing to, regardless of whether or not you've got an ESG mandate or not.
I'm not too sure just because someone's mining coal, they don't have an ESG mandate. A lot of the big mining companies are mining responsibly. Coal is a part of our energy mix, and we all know that is changing, and it's changing more rapidly every year as the new technology and the new pressures arise. But coal is part of our energy mix at the moment, and if it's done responsibly and properly, then it can still have that positive impact whilst we do that just transition, like you say, into the new energy, taking everyone along with us and dealing with some of the societal issues that will come with the extraction from coal. But we can't do that overnight. It has to be a process, a managed process, and a very integrated process over the coming decade or two.
So what I'm hearing you say is it's not dumping brown to become green. It's helping brown become greener over time. That's what the just transition is really about. Tracy, is that enough? Is that enough in a world that is rapidly going to exceed 1.5 degrees, heading to 2.6, and then to endure the catastrophic consequences of climate change as a result?
Well, I mean, I think you'll be unsurprised to hear that my answer to that is no, it's not enough. The phenomenon that you point to about the rising increase, the increase in prices of coal, the share prices of coal mining companies going up, has been kind of seized upon by some people in the investment industry to say, see, you were wrong about this. This is ESG is not important. We don't need to worry about these things. And I think you're absolutely right that the money flows where the returns are, and that is kind of the fundamental premise of ESG should be about: are we making real world impacts, right? Not are we just making some glossy statements in an integrated report while continuing with business as usual. So I agree the transition is a transition. That's why it's a transition. It's not an overnight change, and it's going to be messy. It's not a smooth path. And I think what we're seeing, there are very specific external external factors in the global market that are driving those coal prices at the moment, and that's not going to last forever. And the thing that we need to just be far more honest about in this country is the fact that mining has enormous negative impacts on people and on the environment. And I don't think that anyone in power in South Africa, in the public or private sector, ever really fully admits that. And ESG integration should be about how we address those negative impacts, not just about checking whether you have a good ESG blurb in your integrated report and then going, okay, great, I'll invest in you.
Yeah, those negative externalities that have been spoken about almost ad nauseum for the last 2 decades in the various COP conversations. And we saw yesterday a report around the emissions out of Sasol in particular, amongst the highest in the world, not amongst the highest, the highest in the world. And those are the facts on the ground, though. The other side is the S in ESG and the social good that comes from an industry that is a key export earner, Mzila, that employs a lot of people, and how we balance this equation and transition. As Exxaro, one of the biggest coal operators in Mpumalanga and Limpopo, how are you factoring all of this into your ESG strategy and into your corporate DNA?
Thanks for the question, Michael. And I think from what the panelists have said, one of the key takeaways is that one must take a long-term view around ESG, and particularly around the issue of climate. And whether you're looking at environmental issues or social issues, at the end of the day, combined, these are going to affect people. So a pollution of local water resources downstream is going to have an impact on people. A poor safety record is going to have a devastating impact on employees. So as a listed company, our ESG score is measured in terms of the FTSE Russell ESG index. And we ensure that not only through our integrated report, but in terms of our ongoing communication and reporting of our results, we highlight our ESG performance. And particularly emphasizing that this is not merely just a score issue, but the underlying activities that give effect to that score are also important. So reporting on our safety record and what it means for employee morale, on our health and programs in terms of employees, our employee engagement efforts, and then outside the farm fence, outside the lease area in terms of what we're doing in terms of community. And I think, as the point has been made, it's not perfect. It's work in progress. But I think what the objective and independent ESG analysts do is really keep us in check. And this is enabling a lot of this information to be available to a whole lot of other stakeholders, which then provides for us to be held to be held accountable for our mining activity.
Mzila, I want to stay with you for a second longer, and I would like to get your sense of what the role of Exxaro, a big respected listed mining company, is in the just transition. Are you sitting down, are you thinking about what Mpumalanga, what Limpopo, what that region that has benefited from coal but also suffered because of the effects of coal mining is going to look like once the mines cease to operate?
That question is at the center of our strategy, which we shared with the market on the 20th of September through our Capital Markets Day. And we've entitled our strategy our Sustainable Growth and Impact Strategy, where we're making impact the essence as well as the outcome of our growth strategy. It starts off with recognizing that being a South African company, largely coal-based in terms of electricity, we have very good coal resources and reserves, which we need to ensure that we continue to mine responsibly and supply Eskom with the required coal to continue to generate electricity. I mean, we're sitting in an outlook where the electricity generation is going to be in deficit. We cannot afford to take decisions that will aggravate that situation. Having a strong coal base also provides for a good platform from the cash flows that are generated to then invest in future growth. But part of that growth needs to be low growth. And this is why you would have seen that we also spoke about us investing in renewables. Now, from a policy perspective, the concept of offsetting our emissions whilst we produce coal for Eskom and exports against the electricity generated from renewables is still not clear, but we can deem that. And then we need to look beyond that in terms of where else growth will come from. But I think what is also critical about our strategy is considering that the migration from coal to other forms of growth and revenue is going to have a huge impact as these coal mines close down. And you quote in Mpumalanga, and that's an area where we're giving a lot of attention in terms of how do we plan for what we call at Exxaro mineral succession planning. So the concept of mine closure is pretty well researched and embedded. But when a mine closes, it doesn't mean that people then migrate. People stay because they've established a livelihood for a long time. So the concept of mineral succession planning in terms of how do we leverage off the land, the water treatment plants that a lot of coal mining plants in Mpumalanga are building, how do we bring that together to perhaps rejuvenate an agricultural industry, and also an agricultural industry in a different form, looking at new concepts of agriculture that have come up, such as regenerative agriculture. And these begin to play a very important role in the whole concept of adaptation, because we have to accept that temperature increases will happen. How do we ensure that communities are resilient and able to adapt to a higher temperature environment? Because we're already doing a lot from a mitigation, and over time we don't deny that coal will no longer be part of our energy input, and renewables will be. And how do we also ensure that those communities have access to renewable forms of energy given the available technologies today?
What is important is leadership. And back to your earlier point about Exxaro being an outlier on the positive side, that's certainly been my experience. They were one of the early supporters of a water, energy, food nexus conference that we put on over a decade ago, talking about the intersection of these issues and actually walking the talk, not just ticking a box in a nice integrated report. So, Mzila, is it incumbent, therefore, upon an Exxaro to take the lead here as the best of breed in SA mining in many ways, considering that government to a large extent has failed us and is absent in these conversations?
I think, in the process of development of our strategy, we have come to that realization that I think in whatever way we do have to take a lead. And I think that's coming through in some of the work we're doing around the sustainable impact, which is the pillar of the sustainable growth and impact strategy. And I think to pick up on some of the points that have been made by Jane, for instance, the point around the focus on compliance in terms of closure is one that needs to change, because people don't move because there's no longer an economic activity. And so I think when we develop mines, we need to think of the impact during mining, but also the impact post-mining, and we need to design for that as mining executives. And this is where the point of leadership comes in as far as the role of foresight in leadership. And these are rehabilitative and regenerative plans that obviously will need to be updated every so often, such that by the time we get to mine closure, you actually have developed a new economic activity on the back of that mining activity. And where you have a cluster of mining companies working in proximity to one another, you can then bring all of those resources together to basically develop a new industry. This is how we got to Johannesburg and various other mining activities. So and then the other point is, you made the point of $43 trillion of ESG capital becoming available. That for me is quite encouraging in terms of how the capital markets recognizing these non-modelable, if I can coin a word. You can't put an ESG risk in an Excel spreadsheet, but they recognize that those provide the context for investment and for good investment in the long term. And so that's another partnership that we're seeing coming into the equation, which is going to enable a new way of thinking around mine development and mine closure, and ensuring that there's economic succession when mines close.